Right then, Dad. So, what was your first recollections of the Mau Mau when you were at school?
Well, there were quite a lot of atrocities committed around, and we were at school, so they took precautions at school. We had all the boarding houses, all the entrances were sandbagged, and we had to do an hour patrol up and down the passage every night, and get woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do an hour, walk up and down the passage armed with a pickaxe handle and a siren which we were supposed to sound if anything happened. But we were all right, nothing happened while I was there. We were fairly close to the African reserve where there were problems, but we were all right.
Did any of the how did you feel as a pupil? Were you sort of scared at the time, or was everybody fairly?
Not really, no. Where we were, of course, in the holidays up in Kitale, that wasn't an affected area. That was safe there. The African tribes up there were not involved in the terrorism, and it was quite safe. And we had a family who lived in one of the areas up, which was dangerous. They came and he sent his wife and the 2 young children, and they stayed with us for several months. His house, he took me out to visit one day from Nakuru training. His house had a wire security fence all surrounding it, and all the people living in those areas had various means of raising the alarm. There were rockets, flare rockets, and radios and things. But even so, there were 1 or 2 quite fairly horrendous events where people were killed. There was one particular family. They killed everybody, the man, his wife, and the little children as well. Hacked them to bits with pangas. So it was quite fraught for those sort of people in those areas.
Mm. What did Granny? Sorry, I go on.
What do you want?
No, go on saying you can.
Everybody carried some sort of weapon in those sort of areas, and in fact, Nairobi, it was always fairly amusing to see these women in their summer dresses with pistols strapped to their sides, walking up and down the street shopping. I don't know whether they used them or not, but anyway, people had weapons.
What did sort of Granny and Grandad think about it at the time? Because of course you were boarding, so you know parents now get really concerned if their sort of kids are out late at night. I'd imagine it must have been quite interesting for them knowing that you were away at school, or were they not too worried?
Where at school?
Yeah, no, you know, what did Granny and Grandad think whilst you were, you know, all this was going on and you went there for them to sort of, I guess, see how you were doing?
Well, we were all right at school. There wasn't any problem there. Mm. We didn't have any real worries. I mean, we used to go from school. School was about, I don't know, 5 or 6 miles at least out from the middle of town. We used to go on our bicycles right into town to go to the cinema on a Sunday afternoon. We were occasionally allowed out like that, and we used to do that. And didn't have any problems. Leave our bicycles outside the cinema, and they never got pinched. So it was all fairly normal.
So how did the call-up then work? So
the call-up, all young European men were called, anyone between the ages of 18 and 35 were all called up. And we weren't called up for any specific time, we were called up for as long as we were needed. The emergency existed, so it was open-ended. I was still at school when I was 18, so that was allowed to be deferred, but they wouldn't allow deferment for me to go to university or college. I had to, as soon as I left school, I had to go in the army, and I left school at Christmas '54, and it's more or less the 1st of January, I suppose, '55. We went off to Nakuru for training.
Did you go off with all your sort of school friends from the same sort of year then, effectively? You all went together?
Yeah, there were a lot of us the same. There were, we were four platoons of about 10 men each. Each platoon being trained by a sergeant. It's quite a culture shock. From treating the teachers at school, calling them sir and so on, and calling the instructors sergeants, and being shouted at and obscenities screamed at us from these people while we were doing whatever it was we were told to do. We had 5 people in a room. One of the guys in our platoon, who was in the next room to us, was the singer Roger Whittaker, which I don't know if you've heard of.
Mm-hmm.
He made quite a name for himself. So we did our training. There was sort of competition between each platoon to see who was the best. Our platoon was the worst.
Competition in sense of what? What sort of things?
Well, the lowest scores with everything that we did. We were supposed to, our sergeant was always had the worst platoon.
What sort of things were you having to do then that was competing? I mean, presumably firing and things like that, but...
Yes, drills and fire, the weapons, smartness, everything else. One guy in the other platoon next to us, he got himself into trouble by beating up the sergeant. When they both got into trouble, the sergeant got posted away. So our sergeant took it out on us. He made us do extra running and extra sort of physical things to exhaust us.
What was a typical day like then?
We liked him actually. He was quite nice, but he permanently had beer. He carried beer in his knapsack. Whenever we went anywhere, we had tea and he had his beer.
It's probably...
We reckon he probably got drunk every night.
It's probably why he got the worst platoon then. Mm-hmm. Probably why he got the worst platoon then.
Could be.
What was a typical day like then in the training? What sort of things did you get up to?
Well, we started at the bugle went to wake us up at 5:30 in the morning. We had half an hour to get ourselves up and washed and dressed. Went out to do half an hour PT on the parade ground. There was you have a cup of tea first, mug of tea first, and then do PT. Then go back, change again into our clothes for parade, and then go and have breakfast. After that, we then had to go and make sure our beds were laid out properly. Beds had to be laid out smartly. The boots and shoes had to be shined so that you could see your face in the toe caps, and the 2 pairs of boots, one pair was worn, the other pair was for show, and that was even the hobnails on the bottom had to be polished. Then we had parade and marching up and down. a break for a cup of tea. I can't remember what we did after that. We did all various things, sort of weapons instructions and field craft and all sorts of things like that. And the same again. Then after lunch, we had I think we waited till about 2 o'clock and then back again for more training. At about 4 o'clock we stopped. We then had to go and put on sort of denim work clothes and clean all our kit up with sort of khaki blanco stuff that you had to do, cover the webbing straps with. The belt buckles and buttons of the things had to be brassoed so that they were all shiny. Then we had an evening meal about 6 o'clock, and after that the town was ours. We could go and there was a canteen where we could go and sit there and drink beer and sing rude songs. And that was like that every day. We had forced marches, 5-mile forced march. It had to be done very quickly. That was a bit exhausting, particularly bad for the older guys who weren't quite so fit. We went onto the range quite a lot. The ranges were, we had targets, the target, 4-foot target for 200 to 400 yards, and a 6-foot target at 600 yards. And also there was another round target which was a snap target. This was raised up for a short time and you had to shoot at it, and then it was taken down again. That was quite fun. The rifle I had, he specially adjusted the sights to suit me. They were all a Lee Enfield 303 rifles we had. He adjusted the sights to suit me, poked a thing down the barrel and squinted down it, and adjusted the foresight with a little screw gadget, and that made that rifle very, very accurate. I did very well with that until the 600 yards. The 600 yards, it was getting dark. We were rather late, and it was getting dark, and it was quite difficult to see. So I didn't get all the bullseyes that I should have done. But I missed out. There was a prize for the silver spoon for the person who won the highest score from the targets. I missed out to another guy called Jeremy Rowe by 2 points. Jeremy Rowe was in our platoon, he was in our room as well. So our platoon did very well on the shooting. That was with the rifles. We also used Bren guns there. We went on another range type thing with targets shaped like people, which was sort of sprung up in front of you. There we used Sten guns to shoot at them, or pistols, and pistols both, because we had to go. So you went through this sort of labyrinth with these things suddenly coming up in front of you. You had to whack it with your weapon. Sten guns were quite dangerous things because if you dropped it, the magazine was in, it was likely to fire a round off on its own. They didn't have safety catches. They were later replaced by better weapons. There was first of all the Patchett submachine gun, and then the Sterling. Sterling one was the one I had up in Meru. But that wasn't all that brilliant either. It misfired quite often.
You didn't shoot anything accidentally then?
I tried to shoot guinea fowl with it, but didn't have much success. The last time I tried it out, it fired one round and then jammed, so it jammed every other round. You know, whether the magazines had got damaged or what, I don't know, but it wasn't very successful.
So how long was the training for then?
Training was for 10 weeks, basic training. We then went down to, I think we were given a 48-hour pass. We went home, and after that, I can't remember how we got down to Nairobi, but anyway, from there we went to Narok, which was in the Maasai land. So there wasn't going to be much in the way of terrorist activity down there, but we went out on daily patrols. We had a base camp with proper tents, and we were taken out sort of into the bush with our ponchos and packs. We had to carry everything with us. The pack, 30-pound pack. At the bottom was strapped the sleeping bag. In the pack itself was all our food. So the tins of food and whatever else. There wasn't much room for any sort of personal possessions. Toothbrush and toothpaste, and that was about it. And then on the top was the poncho cape. That was quite uncomfortable walking with that. It was, of course, the tins of food, irregular shaped, stuck into your back, and it was quite uncomfortable. The rifles we were issued then were different ones. These were short Mark 10 rifles, they were called. And the one I had was absolutely hopeless. I couldn't hit anything. We tried shooting at tins on the end of poles in the base camp, and I couldn't hit anything with it.
Why did they give you a different weapon then?
I did what?
Why did they give you a different weapon then?
They were the current weapons. The Lee Enfields were the old. They originally started in the First World War, and they were issued again in the Second World War. It was a long rifle. The Mark 10 was a short rifle. They were the standard issue army rifle then, and they were later replaced by a Belgian rifle called the FN rifle, which was a semi-machine gun, automatic, worked on the same principle as the Bren guns. And the Bren gun worked by some of the gas pushing a piston down and pushing the breech plug back. Bren guns we had to be able to take to pieces and put together again, blindfold. You saw the Bren guns up at that armoury museum we went to. There's a picture of you with it. So we had to fire those on the range.
Right then, so you were saying about, obviously you were then finished your training and went off to the sort of base camp. What happened next then?
Well, we used to go out on patrols, first of all from there, just into the bush and back. Then we were taken out and left out in the wild with just our food, and we were supposed to go on a patrol and sort of march. Often this was took quite a long time. There was one particular day we had to do it around about a 30-mile trek, and were completely knackered when we got back. Water was a problem. Water was a bit scarce around there. There wasn't much in the way of rivers, or there were a few wells and boreholes. Some of the water that we used was quite dirty. We used to make tea with it, so all the dirt didn't show. Water in our water bottles we had to put tablets in to make sure they were pure. We killed the bugs in it. There were 2 tablets, one to purify it, and the other one to take away the taste of the purifier. And we didn't think there was much difference between the taste one with or without, so we didn't bother with the second pill. But it was worth doing, because of course all sorts of things could be in the water. Some of the water that we came across was really foul, so we couldn't use it. But that was quite difficult. Thirst was really quite a problem. So the water bottle that we carried with us, we could only have a sort of sip at a time during the day. We would stop off probably sort of lunchtime. We didn't have a proper meal at lunch. We had breakfast when we got up, usually consisted of our mess tin full of baked beans and a cup of tea, mug of tea. Then we were given, we had some biscuits and packs of dates which we had used for lunch. These had to be eked out for the whole time that we were away from the base camp. So you couldn't eat all of it all in one go. And then in the evenings, when we camped and made our bivouacs with the poncho capes, then we cooked up everything. We had rice, so we cooked that up with rice, and then the tins of vegetables and bully beef and all the rest of it were all lumped together and cooked into a sort of stew with curry powder. And we had a big mess tin full of that and stuffed ourselves till we couldn't stuff anymore. That assuaged the pangs of hunger for a little bit. Generally speaking, in the camps, in the training and everywhere else, the food that we were given was very good. We had some very good meals. Catering at the basic training camp was first class, and then we had a lot of game. They shot game and cooked that for our meals in the base camp. Otherwise, outside of that, it was out of a tin. Sometimes we instead of going for a patrol, we would sort of sit at the top of a hill where we were supposed to observe things, but that wasn't really very much. So we usually had we took a book with us if we could, and sit and read that. Most of the time, though, we were concerned with hunger and food. All the conversation was always about food and what we would do when we got to Nairobi on leave, where we would fill up with good food in the hotels. Well, we were allowed, I can't remember how many times, we did go to Nairobi a few times for a bit of leave, the weekend, stayed in hotels there, which was very nice. Then back again. The regimental headquarters was on the outskirts of the town, and people used to stay there as well as the hotels. You could stay there, and later as a sergeant I used to go and stay in the sergeant's mess up there. There was a nice room. The food in the sergeant's mess was very good. Had a nice room, and it was all very comfortable. All the beer and we weren't allowed to drink spirits, or we weren't provided with spirits in the camps, but we were provided, the beer was there, and we bought that duty free. The military always had the NAFI, which provided supplies free of duty, so the beer was very cheap. So that was quite nice.
Did you have any really bad hangovers?
Not there, no, because we didn't drink that much. Bad hangovers, a really bad hangover I had was in the KAR when we went down into the town. Started off with beer and finished up with brandy and ginger ale, I think I was drinking. And that was quite ill the next day after that.
You weren't expected to patrol the next day, was it a day's leave or something?
Sorry?
Was it a day's leave the next day, or were you expected to go back on patrol?
We were back. We went down because we'd come out of the forest, cleaned ourselves up, and then went into the town in the evening, created a bit of mayhem in the town, and then came back, and then it was back to normal parades the next day. And that was quite difficult.
So when you finished at the base camp, then what was your first sort of deployment then?
That was then after the O level, and then I was seconded to the KAR, I went up to Nairobi, and then I was picked up by, I think it was the doctor who was going back up to the medical officer, going back to Neri, so I went with them. So I reported there, and then I was shown where to sleep that night. We got back fairly late that night. Met the guy who was in charge of the platoon, and I can't remember how many days we were there before we went up into the forest. Then we'd driven up a road into the forest and dumped off at the side, and then we had to make our way into the forest to find a suitable place to camp. So we found a place near a stream. Again, that was quite difficult. You couldn't wash very easily, and so we made a camp there. And you put two poncho capes together, clipped them together, and they're made into a sort of little tent that was suitable for two people in their sleeping bags. We did that. Again, we had our rations with us. In those days we had the proper army rations, and there were two lots. One was a box full of tins and various things for the last one platoon for a day, I think, but there were only two of us. No, there were three of us Europeans who had those. So one of those boxes lasted us for about 10 days. Or the other alternatives were the single 24-hour ration pack, which was a little tin of baked beans and things like that you had for breakfast, and a biscuit which you could make into either porridge or just eat it as an oatmeal biscuit. Lunch was considered, this was done in little separate packs in a large packet. Lunch was sweets, and I think they had lemonade powder, which was disgusting, tea, but it was mostly sweets, and they were not very nice sweets. Evening there were little tins of meat and vegetables or something like that, and a tin of a pudding, and again more cups of tea.
Did you have the same rations as the Africans then? It's them that you were with?
No, we didn't have the same rations as them.
What did they get?
And they got maize meal, they got bags of peanuts. I can't remember what else they had, whether they had any meat of any sort. They probably did.
Was there a reason why it was different?
For the normal culture, they had different diet.
Right.
Mainly living on a diet of maize meal, porridge and things like that. And I think they still do. Now they sell that stuff in the restaurants in Nairobi.
So was this when you got seconded to the KAR, was it? King's African?
Yeah.
So how did that come about? Because you were, that's when you got a promotion then, was it?
Yes, because the Kenya Regiment people seconded to the various regiments. So there was always one per platoon for all the different regiments that came from outside. I was in the KAR was the Uganda one, but then there were lots of British battalions out there, various regiments. All the local customs and things we knew, with which they weren't familiar.
So that was a promotion for you. Did you have to sort of earn it in any way, or was it all?
No, it was automatic. Anybody who was seconded was immediately was a sergeant.
So what was? How many people were you? So you, being a sergeant, were you in charge of the group then, effectively, or was there somebody in charge of the group? How did it work?
The platoon was commanded by a second lieutenant. we were really sort of supernumerary. There was an African sergeant major. He was a real dyed-in-the-wool chap, nice fellow. Then we had the colour sergeant, who was Idi Amin, and there was a corporal, another guy who worked the radio. These were all Africans. So there were 3 Europeans. There was second lieutenant, me, and tracker dog handler, who was a British Army guy, also seconded.
What sort of dogs did they use then? Tracking dogs? Was it sort of Alsatians and this?
I can't remember now. I think there were all sorts, mostly Alsatians. No, I don't think there were. I can't remember. It's too long ago.
Okay, so tell me then, when you were with the KAR, what were you sort of getting up to in the jungle then?
Well, we used to go out in the mornings on a patrol round, hunting for any sort of activity that might have been tracks and things like that. It was all, the Aberdares are quite very high altitude, so it was very, very cold at night. The result of that was very, very heavy dew in the mornings, so you'd go out and sort of push your way through the bushes and be soaking wet within about 5 minutes of leaving the camp. We had these awful canvas jungle boots which leaked the water in straight away, so you had wet, sore feet for most of the day. In the end I gave up on those and used my leather boots that had been so painfully polished in a training centre, and used those. That was a lot better, but it was still very wet clothes for most of the day. So you ploughed your way through the forest looking for any sort of signs of anything. We didn't come across any dangerous wildlife of any sort. I think things like snakes and the like ran away whenever they heard humans around. Then we would come back in the evening or later on, sit around a campfire at night, drying off, steaming our clothes off, and then have a meal and then go to bed. After a time, of course, our sleeping bags became increasingly insanitary and very difficult to get clean because they had a waterproof underneath bit, so you couldn't wash them. Dry cleaning would have taken too long when we were back in the base camp in Neri, the headquarters. So we had to put up with them. We were in the forest for periods of 6 weeks each, so that's 6 weeks without washing and without being able to change your clothes. So we were a pretty horrible state by the time we came back. So the best thing was to take off all your filthy clothes and have a nice long hot bath when we got back. That was sheer luxury.
And how long was it before you went out again then?
Sorry?
How long would it be? How long a break would you get before you'd have to go out again?
I might have a week off and then back again. We used to go down into the town whenever we could and do a bit of shopping. Then back again up into the forest. Because it got so cold, we took blankets with us, a blanket with us as well, stuck in our packs. To wrap ourselves up. On one occasion we had to go above the tree line where no trees, it's so high that the trees won't grow anymore because it's too cold. And that was over 10,000 feet, and that was bitterly cold that night. We camped out there. we were supplied with fresh food again by airdrops. They wrapped these things in little sacking things packed up as well as they could, and dropped them out of this light aircraft. He came by and dropped umpteen of these little packets out, which was more food for us all. All the tins, of course, got thoroughly bent, but so we used to go there and collect that.
Who decided the route you went around when you were going around the jungle? How did you was it just sort of random, just decide to go in one direction and another direction each day?
Yes, or followed any game trails or any other things like that. And there were a couple of occasions. One occasion, I wasn't actually with them at the time. This platoon went out, and they did come across this group of terrorists and shot them up, and they killed one of them. And then another occasion, we were going through and came across this hide where there were half a dozen of these guys down there, and we were getting ready to sort of open up on them when one of our guys opened up too early, and so everybody else opened up as well. But by that time, of course, the guys had taken off into the bush, so we didn't get those. Any of them, but we booby-trapped their food, and that worked, because we heard somebody had been injured quite badly as a result of that.
So most of the time it was just trudging around the jungle then?
That's right, yes. Each platoon was given a little sector to work in, so there weren't, you weren't expected to do all that much area, because there were, a lot of different groups up in there at the same time. But it wasn't all that we did sort of have a bit of relaxation. There was a bit of film that I took there. We were trying to catch fish in one of the rivers down at the bottom. Most of the rivers had trout put in them at one time or another. I think in the end they gave up and then threw a grenade in and managed to catch a few fish that way. That worked quite well.
We're now in the Aberdare forest. This is one of our camps. The forest was thick jungle. A lot of it was very thick bamboo. Bivouacs were made out of our ponchos, 2 of them, and two to a little tent. That's a patrol going out. It was very cold at night there, and there was a lot of dew. You got soaking wet within about 5 minutes of going out. The valleys were very steep, hills and valleys that we had to walk up and down, and it was very difficult. Two guys posing for the camera. This was another of our camps, in the open this time, slightly more room. That's my tent. You can see how steep the hills and valleys are. We had to walk up and down that. Wasn't all work. He was trying to catch fish with a stick, a piece of string and a bent pin. I don't think he was very successful. The platoon clown.
What's your recollections of Idi Amin then?
He was all right. He was well liked. He was a very good sportsman. He'd actually been a boxing champion. Big guy, and he was a very good soldier, and all the platoon, respected him. He was at the time, it was all right, and even later on, he was considered good, and he was commissioned before the British pulled out, so he became an officer, and then of course when the British pulled out and he staged his coup d'etat, he then promoted himself to Field Marshal, and after that of course he became a despot.
So how long were you with the sort of KAR for then?
I must have been there for, wasn't there all that long, I suppose, because probably about 6 months. I was 10 weeks in Nakuru in the training, and then probably about a month in the operational training before I went to so that's 4 months. So about 8 months in the KL.
We're now at Neri in the 4th Battalion, the King's African Rifles. I was with them before I went up to Meru as a field intelligence officer. This is a sports day we were having. The man in the white is Idi Amin, the future dictator of Uganda. There he is again. He was a colour sergeant in our platoon. Sergeants versus the subalterns.
Then they were recalled back to Uganda. When they were recalled back, the Kenya Regiment people were not allowed to go with them. They had to return back to Nairobi. So it was there that I went, and they were saying that they were looking for people to do this intelligence, and I went along to the place, their office in Nairobi, and said, you know, could I do it? And they said, yes, that's all right. So they arranged with the Kenya Regiment for me to be transferred to them. They called us Field Intelligence Officers, FIOs, and so I was sent up to Meru, which was a bit round the corner from Nyeri, where we were with the KAR, a different district. And there we were put in with another lot of guys who were the district officers who ran the administration in the particular areas. And we were supposed to look for any terrorists around. We were supposed to have a informer network, although these were fairly useless because the one I inherited, I think they were more interested in the money that they were paid rather than providing anything useful. We did go into the forest occasionally to have a look, but most of the success was from the police general service unit, which was a sort of semi-military arrangement. They used to go up there, and they did actually find quite a lot of them. On one particular occasion, came back with a truckload full of these prisoners, some of which were quite badly wounded. So I lived with these other guys. There was the divisional district officer and another district officer, two other district officers and me. So that's four of us in this house. And the houses were, the compounds were sort of barricaded in with walls and a gate to get in and out of, with a sentry who looked after it. And there were also the tribal police were in there as well. They were established like a sort of home guard. And so we lived there. And then after a short time there, one of the other district officers and myself moved away a bit further down, round the corner of this particular hill, mountain, foresty bit, where they built him a new house and a new compound, and we were there for a little while.
This is a house we lived in, one of them, and the view from it. We now moved into Meru. This is just outside Meru town from the house I lived in, and this is a view of Mount Kenya from it. You could see this every morning when it was clear. Here is our house. Three of us shared this house. There were no mod cons. Water had to be brought up from the little stream down in the valley below. This is a view round the area looking from the house. There's a sports field there. We even had a few flowers. The gunners here were shelling the forest up above. It's interesting to watch, but I don't think it did any good. Carrying a new shell. It's my Land Rover.
I hadn't come across any terrorist activity around there very much. All the local Africans were rounded up into concentrated villages. They built these villages which then were sort of guarded, so that the terrorists had committed a lot of atrocities against their own people, and to sort of protect them as well as trying to isolate them from the population, from the terrorists in the forest. They had gathered these people up together so that they couldn't help them very easily. And then if there were any who surrendered or came down, it was my job to interrogate them. And so we lived there. I used to drive round all the areas, seeing if there was anything that was of interest. Mostly there wasn't. And then we used to go drive into town, well, probably once a week anyway, collect supplies and go to the pub. There was a pub called the Pig and Whistle Hotel, where we adjourned to the bar and had a few beers and then had lunch. Once, I think it was once a month, we had to have our vehicles inspected by the local police superintendent, and that had to be spotlessly clean. Everything, the engine, everything had to be spotlessly clean. You know, it was quite a chore. We didn't like that.
And so when you went around the villages or anything like that, was it just you on your own, or did you go with, was always two of you? Or
me on my own, driving round. Things were a lot quieter when I was doing that. There wasn't quite so much in the way of main activity, terrorist activity. Mostly they were keeping their distance and trying to keep away from being caught.
So when you interrogated them, did you ever find any useful information? Was it?
No, I didn't. We did have one lot who kept brought in at 3 o'clock in the morning. I had to get up and talk to him and try and find out where he came from and what was what. And then write a little report out and take it through the next day with him into the town where he was locked up. But then anyway, after a little while there, I was taken into the town we had to report in every day on our vehicle radios. I was taken in to look after that and talk to all the other guys in the district, get their reports in every day from the main control area. And I lived in a house with another couple of guys just outside the town. There they had a compound there which was full of the surrendered terrorists, and that was my job to interrogate all this lot. So that was a sort of 9 till 5 job. sitting there talking to these people and writing it all down. That was all typed out by the local police superintendent's wife, who was the sort of secretary there. And so that was quite boring. That was a sort of 9 to 5. You couldn't get out and drive around very much.
This is On the Way to Meru. This film relates to my military career. We're on the way to Meru here, where I was a field intelligence officer. This is a view of Mount Kenya. Here's an African village. These were mostly little shops. There was a lot of game very close to where we lived. It was about 5 miles away, and you could see all these animals roaming completely wild. This wasn't a game reserve. I believe it is now, but it wasn't at the time, and these were just animals that were free to move where they wanted. That's an eland. There were lots of zebra, giraffe, various antelopes and elephants. Vultures in the tree. Somali camels. This is in the northern part of the area that I worked in. The Somalis brought their camels down to graze here because there was more for them to eat. It's very arid up in the northern part. You can see how dry and arid it is. These are surrendered terrorists waiting for interrogation.
Okay then, Dad. Right. So we were talking about intelligence, and you were having to interview people for sort of all day, every day. You said that was very boring.
I was in the main town. I still had quite an area to cover, but most of the time I was interrogating these prisoners. We had to decide, having talked to them, where they would go afterwards. Some of them were sent, if we thought they were really nasty pieces of work, would be sent to detention camps. Others would be put under supervision orders and sent back home. Mostly, we had all these people living in the sort of shack next to our house. There wasn't any security there of any sort. I still had my gun, which I kept under my bed, and sort of reached for it every time I woke up, just in case somebody had come and stolen it. We lived, the three of us there. The food, our diet was pretty basic. We ate, mostly, if we wanted to eat meat, it had to come out of a tin. Otherwise we lived on omelette and chips, which really wasn't very good for us because there wasn't any vegetables and there wasn't any vitamins. So I came out in sores and things and had to take vitamin tablets. The local shop provided all the basics, was run by an Indian, and you could get pretty much everything you wanted there. And we had the bread was baked by our cook in an old oil tin, and he sort of filled it up with ashes and burning stuff, and then raked it out, and then put the flour in there, and it seemed to work quite well. We had these baked loaves that he did. Sometimes we were lucky, and there's a town further north which was civilized called Nanyuki, and the local butcher would sometimes come down with proper cuts of meat, which we would, that was a real treat. We would buy a joint of beef and cook that. It had to be eaten quickly because we didn't have a fridge. So we sort of make a pig of ourselves with that. There were three of us who lived in the house. Another one was a contemporary of mine, and the other guy was a policeman. He was a real rolling stone. He'd been all over the place. Been in the Rhodesian Air Force, and then he'd volunteered for the Kenya Police. Nice chap. I don't know what happened to him. He was about 30, as opposed to us being in our 20s.
What was his name?
His name was Roy Montague.
Mm-hmm.
He'd had a little bit of a frucker in his Rhodesian Air Force days. Him and his friend had been doing loops over and under each other. One had come up underneath the other one too soon, so they'd had to bail out with their parachutes. He proudly exhibited his Caterpillar Club badge. Anyway,
what's the Caterpillar Club badge then?
that's people who jumped out of aeroplanes with parachutes.
Right.
Anyway, in due course, things had quietened down a lot, and then they decided they wanted to start economising, so we weren't allowed to use very much petrol. Those Land Rovers were not very economical. The one I had were lucky if you got 15 miles to the gallon with it. So there was usually just enough petrol we were allowed to drive to town to the pub, and that was about it. So I couldn't drive around much, so most of the time when I wasn't talking to the terrorists, which eventually they dried up, we spent sort of lying about in the sun or reading books and doing nothing very much. It was a bit boring. It's quite nice to be able to get around and drive about. I had driven up quite far up into the north. There was a lovely place called Buffalo Springs, right up in the north. This spring of water, in the middle of a sort of semi-desert. Beautiful, clear spring water, absolutely crystal clear. We'd go up there and swim in it. There was one occasion when they were filming a film there, Victor Mature and Janet Lee, I think it was. Anyway, he and his gang of hooligans came up to make a nuisance of themselves up there once when we were there, loud-mouthed and shouting, and they went in and swam, and so we left them to it. That was a nice place. Presumably, I think they've turned it into a sort of tourist resort now. In those days, if you went up into that part, it was very remote. If you weren't to do with the government, I mean, others all right, but if you were an ordinary civilian and wanted to go up there, you had to have a special government permit to do it, because if you went up there and your car broke down, then there was no way that anybody could come and rescue you if they didn't know you were up there. And you could be miles away from anywhere, and there was no way of getting in touch with anybody, and there was nobody within miles.
So did you just give notice beforehand before you were going, so people knew where?
I just went, and we went about back roads and things as well. Being in a government vehicle, the people on the roadblock at the top, checking things wouldn't have worried anyway, because it was a government vehicle. And in any case, we were all right because we had radios in the cars, so we could get help if we needed it. I did that when I turned the Land Rover over, skidding on a muddy road, and had to call in and get somebody to come and help me.
Did you get injured doing
I
that?
got quite bruised. I was a bit sore for a few days.
What, were you thrown from the Land Rover when it
No,
flipped
I
over, or
was
you
tipped
stuck
up
in it?
Tipped up in it, and of course banged my knees and shoulder and things on the side as it tipped. I wasn't going very fast. It was too slippery to go fast in it anyway. The muddy roads were very, very slippery. It was a bit like driving on ice here in the winter.
Mm.
And none of the roads were metalled. Even the main road to Nairobi wasn't. The only metal bit of road was across the Rift Valley and down the Rift Valley. That had been built by the Italians, the prisoners of war during the war.
This is called Buffalo Springs. It's very arid up there. In the middle of this semi-desert is this pool of crystal clear water. It's quite a little way to go, but we used to go up there and have a swim. You can see how dry it is. The far north of Kenya is almost desert. No bathing costumes. That's me.
Anyway, at the end of that time, about towards the end of 1956, the government had decided things had quietened down to the extent when they could start releasing us from military service. So we were allowed to resign if we wanted to. I think the guys in the police would have liked me to have signed a 2-year contract and carried on working there, but I decided I wanted to go and come over here, finish my education. So I handed in my resignation, and they let me go, provided that I kept them informed, because I was still liable for 3 years of reserve, which consisted of a weekly camp, a week's camp once a year, and I think I can't remember how it was it once a month probably, a sort of training exercise in the town. That was supposed to have been in Kitale, where I was supposed to have gone. I never went there, of course, and I never did that because in 1963 at independence the regiment was disbanded, and all those liabilities therefore were ineffective. They weren't. They couldn't be enforced. In any case, I wasn't there. I was here, and that was it, really.
So did you? So you went up when you were sort of first conscripted with a lot of your sort of school friends from that time.
Yes.
Did you end up sort of actually serving out with them, or did you end up sort of all going in different directions?
Yeah, most of us went in different directions. I don't think. There was one of the guys. One of the other FIOs in the district was someone I'd gone to school with, by the name of Ron Blanchy. All the other guys, divisional district officer. I don't know where he came from. The other district officers, both of them, they were from England. They took on short-term contracts. A lot of these young chaps went out, really, I suppose, for a bit of adventure, and they were put in as administrators in some of the districts. So there was a couple of guys there. They were from England. What about the other one in the police? Roy Montague, he was from England. There was another young chap, he was from the other school in Nairobi, a young chap, my contemporary, who lived with us.
Did you finish as a sergeant? Was that your sort of?
Well, no. We were the sort of rank was FIO, Field Intelligence Officer. So, but as far as the records of the Kenya Regiment are concerned, I was sergeant, because that's what's written on the back of my medal.
Oh, it's personalised, is it?
Oh yeah, all medals are.
Okay.
They're all personalised.
Well, World War II they didn't, did they? Some of those, but
yes, yes. All put their names on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, how did you feel about it at the time? Were you sort of ever scared at all, or was it all like a young adventure for you?
I was never scared. I was never scared. I think a lot of it had quietened down then. I mean, some of the sort of battles that the guys fought were quite fierce at one time. I never had anything like that.
So I remember you saying one of the other things you had to do when you were sort of working in, was it the FIO, you had to sort of go and get these sort of bodies identified. How did that all work? That sounds quite grim.
Yes, well, that was, you become desensitised a bit, really. We had to load these things in the back of the Land Rover and go around, see if anybody recognised them. Whether anybody did recognise them or not, I don't know, but we never got any names attached to them. They sometimes said that they didn't know who they were, and so we ended up just sort of dumping them beside the road in the end, and with the instructions, if anybody passing saw them and recognised them, come and tell us. Of course,
what, just in a ditch or something, did you?
Eventually, of course, they all rotted and dissolved into the road.
Did you just dump them anywhere, or was there like a...
One I was sent to look for, and he was in quite an advanced state of decomposition. That was revolting. The smell was horrible. So
did they have to bring the bodies down from the mountains or wherever they killed them, and then
they were, yes. They loaded them in the back of the Land Rover, and of course they had to wash the Land Rover out afterwards. It was covered in blood and...
Yeah. That must have been quite horrific when you first saw that, wasn't it? Or
sorry?
Was that horrific when you first saw it, or did you, like you say, you just get used to it?
You get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a bit squeamish, the first one, with the body with the KAR that they shot. That was a bit squeamish to start with, but then after that, you've seen so many, you've seen some of them with the most horrible wounds. A guy with a shotgun wound in his chest there with a hole about a foot across.
God. Can't imagine that.
But you become desensitised to that sort of thing. Anyway, then I left them, and that was it.
Cool. Are there any other sort of stories or memories that you can think of that you'd like to share?
Learned a lot of rude songs, and what else? We had a party. The original district officer that I lived with, he was sent off to a fairly remote place, and he had tents and things put up round, and we had a party there, and a whole lot of us went there. We got thoroughly tight and went out afterwards and sort of let off steam with all the weapons that we got. You could one of the weapons that was around was a 2-inch mortar, and you could fire. They had different types of shells for this. There was the high explosive one, but then there was the flare, parachute flare, and you fired this thing up into the air, and it produced this brilliant flare that stung on the bottom of a parachute. It lit up the whole countryside, very, 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 very bright. And so they set off these things and then tried to shoot them down. Of course, somebody had tracer bullets in their thing, but nobody could hit them.
So you're going to say somebody
far too advanced for that. I mean, we started with beers at 4 o'clock and went on in the afternoon and went on to whiskies later, and probably about 10:30 went out and did this. I don't know how many rounds of ammunition. It must have sounded like a real pitched battle going on up there.
Sounds like a good idea, giving guns to drunks.
Yeah, fun day there.
Fantastic.
So he did manage to live it up at some stage.
Oh, yes.
Exactly.
Oh, yes. We used to go down and have a lot of beers in the bar. And then, of course, there was the New Year's celebration in the bar as well, in the hotel. Run by a couple called the Stevens. I don't know what would have happened to that hotel. The Stevens had a son, I think it was a son-in-law and a daughter, who also worked there, and they decided they had to come over to England to see what it was like. But everybody was talking about, England and how wonderful it was, and they came over here. Thought, oh God, what a dreadful place, and they couldn't wait to get back again.
Was that soon after the war?
No, it was while I was there.
Oh, while you were there?
Yeah, the Stevens rang us.
But don't forget, we were still rationed and everything till 51, 52.
Well, this was 1956. There wasn't any rationing then.
No, but we didn't have much.
This is a parade waiting for the inspection by the governor, who's coming up on a visit. A lot of pomp and ceremony. This was held on the sports field just outside our house. Here comes the governor. That's the local shopkeeper's car. The governor was Sir Evelyn Baring. Police askaris and the tribal police, home guard. Quite a big crowd there, onlookers. Governor leaving.